The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned interstate as Jake Martinez crouched behind the rusted shell of an overturned semi-truck, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. 3 months had passed since the outbreak began, and the world he once knew had crumbled into a nightmare of survival and constant vigilance. The distant groaning of the undead echoed through the empty highway, a haunting reminder that nowhere was truly safe anymore. Jake adjusted his grip on the baseball bat he'd salvaged from a sporting goods store 2 weeks ago, its aluminum surface now marked with dents and stains he preferred not to think about too deeply. Beside him, Emily Rodriguez peered through a pair of cracked binoculars, scanning the road ahead for any signs of movement. Her dark hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, and her once pristine nurse's uniform had been replaced by sturdy jeans and a leather jacket that had seen better days. "I count at least 12 of them wandering around that gas station," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "But there might be more inside the building." Emily had become their unofficial scout, her medical training having given her a keen eye for detail and an ability to remain calm under pressure that had saved their group more times than Jake could count. The gas station in question sat like a lonely island in the middle of nowhere, its broken windows and blood-stained walls telling the story of humanity's last stand in this particular corner of the world. What made it valuable, however, was the pharmacy attached to its eastern wall and the potential supplies that might still be untouched within. Their group desperately needed medical supplies, especially with winter approaching and the constant threat of infection from even minor wounds in this new world where hospitals no longer existed. Behind them, tucked safely in a grove of pine trees about a quarter-mile back, the rest of their group waited with growing anxiety. Marcus Thompson, a former construction worker whose massive frame and gentle demeanor had made him their unofficial protector, kept watch over the children while trying to maintain the illusion that everything would be all right. His wife Rebecca had been one of the first casualties when their original group of 30 had attempted to reach the rumored safe zone in Colorado, and since then, Marcus had thrown himself into protecting what remained of their makeshift family with fierce determination. The children, twins Tommy and Katie Williams, had been found hiding in a school basement 3 weeks ago, their parents nowhere to be found and their young minds struggling to comprehend the horror that had consumed their world. At 8 years old, they had adapted to their new reality with the resilience that only children possess, but Jake could see the fear in their eyes whenever the groaning of the undead grew too close. Keeping them safe had become everyone's primary motivation, a beacon of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. Dr. Patricia Hayes, a retired veterinarian who had joined their group after they'd rescued her from an overrun medical clinic, served as their strategist and voice of reason. Her silver hair and calm demeanor belied a sharp intellect and a wealth of practical knowledge that had proven invaluable in their survival efforts. She understood that their current position was becoming increasingly untenable as food supplies dwindled and the zombie horde seemed to be growing larger and more aggressive with each passing day. The plan they had developed was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. Jake and Emily would create a distraction on the western side of the gas station, drawing the zombies away from the main building while Marcus circled around to the east and entered through the pharmacy's rear entrance. The success of their mission depended on timing, coordination, and more than a little luck, commodities that had become increasingly scarce in their new world. As Emily continued her surveillance, Jake found himself thinking about the world that had existed just 3 months ago, when his biggest concern had been meeting quarterly sales targets at his marketing firm. The outbreak had started in major cities, spreading faster than anyone could have imagined, and by the time the government had attempted to implement containment protocols, it was already too late. The zombies, though Jake still struggled with that term, moved with a relentless hunger that seemed to override any sense of self-preservation, making them nearly impossible to stop once they caught a scent. What made their current situation even more precarious was the growing evidence that the zombies were beginning to exhibit new behaviors. Some members of their original group had reported seeing them working together in rudimentary ways, and there were disturbing rumors from other survivor groups about zombies that seemed to retain fragments of their former intelligence. Whether these reports were accurate or simply the product of stressed minds trying to make sense of an incomprehensible situation, Jake couldn't say for certain, but the possibility added another layer of danger to every decision they made. The sound of Emily's sharp intake of breath brought Jake's attention back to the immediate situation, and he followed her gaze to see something that made his blood run cold. A figure emerged from behind the gas station's main building, but this wasn't one of the mindless, shambling creatures they had grown accustomed to fighting. This zombie moved with purpose, its head turning methodically from side to side as if actively searching for something. Its clothes, while torn and blood-stained, were relatively intact, and most disturbing of all, it carried what appeared to be a crowbar in its right hand with a grip that suggested intentional use rather than mere coincidence. Jake felt his stomach drop as he watched the creature examine the ground around the gas station, its movements deliberate and calculated in a way that defied everything they thought they knew about the undead. Emily lowered the binoculars slowly, her face pale as she turned to Jake with wide eyes that reflected his own growing terror. "That thing is hunting," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly despite her medical training and usual composure under pressure. "It's not just wandering around looking for food, it's actually searching for tracks, for signs that people have been here recently." The implications of her observation sent a chill down Jake's spine as he realized that their entire understanding of zombie behavior might have been catastrophically incomplete. The creature continued its methodical examination of the area, occasionally stopping to crouch down and inspect something on the ground that Jake couldn't see from their distance. Other zombies in the area seemed to defer to this one, stepping aside when it moved through their path and even appearing to respond to subtle gestures it made with its free hand. The hierarchy that was emerging before their eyes suggested a level of social organization that made their current mission exponentially more dangerous and their long-term survival prospects significantly bleaker. Jake pressed himself closer to the truck's metal shell, trying to process what they were witnessing while simultaneously formulating a new plan. The original strategy of using distraction and misdirection would be useless against zombies that could think, plan, and potentially communicate with each other. Worse yet, if this creature was capable of tracking, their hiding spot in the pine grove might already be compromised, putting Marcus and the children in immediate danger from an enemy that could actively hunt them rather than simply stumble upon them by accident. Emily pulled out the small two-way radio they used for communication with the rest of their group, but Jake quickly placed his hand over hers to stop her from transmitting. The creature below had paused in its investigation and tilted its head slightly, as if listening for something specific. The possibility that these evolved zombies might be able to detect electronic signals or recognize the significance of radio chatter added another terrifying dimension to their situation. Every assumption they had made about staying hidden and avoiding detection would need to be completely reconsidered. The original group of 12 zombies that Emily had counted earlier began to move in a pattern that looked disturbingly organized, forming a loose perimeter around the gas station while the intelligent one continued its search. Some positioned themselves near potential escape routes, while others took up positions that would allow them to observe approaching threats from multiple directions. The coordination was subtle but unmistakable, suggesting that these creatures had developed tactical awareness that went far beyond simple hunger-driven instincts. Jake's mind raced through their limited options as he watched the scene unfold below. Returning to the group empty-handed was becoming increasingly likely, but the medical supplies in that pharmacy represented their only hope of treating the infections and injuries that were inevitable in their harsh new reality. Dr. Hayes had been clear about their situation. Without proper antibiotics and wound care supplies, even minor cuts could become fatal in a world where medical facilities no longer existed and basic hygiene had become a luxury they could rarely afford. The intelligent zombie suddenly stopped its investigation and turned directly toward their hiding spot, its head cocked at an angle that suggested it had detected something. Jake felt his heart pounding against his ribs as the creature began walking purposefully in their direction, the crowbar held ready in a grip that spoke of planned violence rather than instinctive aggression. Behind it, the other zombies began to shift their positions, creating what looked like a coordinated search pattern that would systematically cover the entire area around the highway. Emily's breathing became rapid and shallow as she recognized the immediate threat, and Jake could see her struggling with the same terrible calculation he was making. They could attempt to flee back to the group, but that would likely lead the hunting party directly to Marcus and the children. They could try to fight, but their weapons were designed for dealing with individual, mindless zombies, not a coordinated group led by something that could think and plan. The third option, remaining hidden and hoping the creature would lose interest, seemed increasingly unlikely as it continued its steady approach toward their position. The sound of the creature's footsteps on the asphalt grew closer, each step measured and deliberate rather than the shuffling gait they had come to associate with the undead. Jake tightened his grip on the baseball bat while trying to calculate the distance between their current position and the nearest alternative cover, knowing that their next decision could determine not only their own survival but the fate of everyone who was counting on them to return safely with the supplies they desperately needed. The intelligent zombie stopped approximately 50 yards from their hiding spot, its head tilting with an unsettling bird-like motion as it seemed to process information that Jake and Emily couldn't comprehend. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the creature remained perfectly still, and Jake began to wonder if perhaps they had been fortunate enough to avoid detection after all. That hope was shattered when the zombie raised its crowbar and tapped it 3 times against a nearby road sign, producing a metallic clanging sound that immediately caught the attention of every other undead creature in the vicinity. The response was immediate and coordinated, with zombies emerging from behind buildings, abandoned vehicles, and other hiding spots that Jake hadn't even realized were occupied, their movements suggesting a level of communication and organization that fundamentally changed everything about their survival strategies. Emily grabbed Jake's arm with enough force to leave bruises, her medical training telling her that they were witnessing something that shouldn't be possible according to everything the scientific community had theorized about the outbreak. The zombies were forming what could only be described as a search grid, with each creature taking a specific position that would allow them to systematically examine every potential hiding spot in the area. The intelligent one continued to tap its improvised signal device, varying the rhythm and intensity in what appeared to be a complex communication system that directed the movements of its followers with military-like precision. Jake forced himself to think beyond his immediate terror, recognizing that this discovery represented information that other survivor groups desperately needed to know, assuming any still existed. If zombies were evolving, developing intelligence and communication abilities, then every safe zone, every fortified position, every survival strategy that humans had developed over the past 3 months would need to be completely reconsidered. The implications extended far beyond their own immediate survival, potentially affecting whatever remained of human civilization's chances of ultimately reclaiming their world from the undead plague. The search pattern was methodical and thorough, with each zombie examining its assigned area before moving to the next position in a coordinated rotation that left no ground uncovered. Jake estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before the search reached their current hiding spot, and the nearby terrain offered limited alternatives for concealment. The pine grove where Marcus waited with the children was visible from their position, and Jake realized with growing horror that the search pattern would inevitably lead the hunting party directly to their companions, who were completely unaware of the danger approaching them. Emily seemed to reach the same conclusion simultaneously, her face reflecting the terrible weight of their situation as she carefully reached for the radio despite Jake's earlier warning about potential detection. The risk of alerting the intelligent zombie to their presence had to be weighed against the certainty that Marcus and the children would be discovered if they remained unwarned. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the radio's frequency to their predetermined emergency channel, hoping that the brief transmission would be lost among the ambient noise of the search operation. Storm approaching from the east, she whispered into the device, using their code phrase for immediate evacuation. All units move to secondary position immediately. The message was necessarily brief and cryptic, but Jake knew that Marcus would understand its urgency and begin moving the children toward their predetermined fallback location deeper in the forest. Whether they could reach safety before being detected would depend largely on how quickly Marcus could motivate 2 frightened 8-year-olds to move through difficult terrain without making noise. The intelligent zombies had snapped up at the sound of Emily's transmission, its attention focused with laser-like intensity on their general area. It gestured with the crowbar toward several of its followers, who immediately began moving more rapidly in their direction while maintaining their search formation. The creature's ability to triangulate the source of the radio signal suggested sensory capabilities that went far beyond what they had observed in regular zombies, adding another terrifying dimension to an already overwhelming threat. Jake made a decision that he hoped wouldn't prove fatal for everyone involved, recognizing that their only chance of protecting the group lay in drawing the hunting party away from the direction Marcus would be traveling with the children. He stood up slowly from behind the truck, making himself visible to the intelligent zombie while keeping his baseball bat ready for what would likely be his final confrontation. The creature's response was immediate and chilling, emitting a low vocalization that sounded almost like speech but remained incomprehensible to human ears, while directing its followers to surround Jake's position with tactical precision. Emily rose beside him without hesitation, her loyalty overriding her survival instincts as she prepared to face whatever came next alongside her companion. The small pistol she had taken from a police station weeks earlier felt inadequate against the number of zombies now converging on their position, but she checked its ammunition anyway, knowing that every shot would need to count if they had any hope of survival. The mathematical reality of their situation was stark: 2 humans with limited weapons against more than a dozen zombies led by something that could think and plan. The intelligent zombie approached with confident, measured steps, its followers maintaining their encirclement while staying far enough back to avoid interfering with what appeared to be a deliberate confrontation. Jake found himself studying the creature's face, searching for any remaining trace of the human it had once been, and was disturbed to find what looked like recognition in its eyes, as if it understood exactly what it was doing and took some form of satisfaction from the hunt. The crowbar in its hand was positioned not just as a weapon but as a tool it knew how to use effectively, suggesting retained motor skills and tactical thinking that made it exponentially more dangerous than the mindless creatures they had fought before. The distance between them continued to shrink with each passing second, and Jake knew that within moments, they would discover whether human determination and desperation could overcome evolved undead intelligence and coordination in a battle that would determine the fate of everyone they cared about. The intelligent zombie raised its crowbar with deliberate slowness, and Jake could see something that chilled him more than the weapon itself. The creature was smiling, or at least attempting to, its partially decomposed facial muscles pulling into a grotesque parody of human expression that suggested it was enjoying the hunt. Emily fired first, her shot catching one of the approaching zombie's center mass and dropping it immediately, but the sound of gunfire seemed to energize the others rather than frighten them. The intelligent one let out another of its incomprehensible vocalizations, and suddenly the coordinated approach became a full assault, with zombies closing in from multiple directions while their leader hung back to observe and direct the attack. Jake swung his baseball bat with desperate precision, connecting with the skull of the nearest zombie and feeling the familiar sickening crunch that had become the soundtrack of his survival. But these zombies moved differently than the others they had encountered, dodging with surprising agility and even attempting to grab the bat rather than simply absorbing the impact. Emily continued firing, each shot carefully aimed to maximize their limited ammunition, but the tactical nature of the assault meant that dropping one zombie simply created an opening for another to advance from a different angle. The intelligent zombie stepped forward as its followers engaged the humans, studying their fighting techniques with the detached interest of a scientist observing laboratory specimens. When Jake's bat became temporarily lodged in the ribcage of a particularly large zombie, the leader moved with startling speed, bringing its crowbar down in an arc that would have split Jake's skull if Emily hadn't tackled him sideways at the last possible moment. The 2 humans rolled across the asphalt, struggling to regain their footing while zombies closed in from every direction, their coordinated movements making escape seem increasingly impossible. From somewhere in the distance, Jake heard the sound of breaking branches and muffled voices, indicating that Marcus had received Emily's warning and was attempting to evacuate with the children. The noise drew the attention of several zombies, who turned toward the sound with the focused intensity of predators detecting wounded prey. The intelligent zombie gestured toward the forest with its crowbar, and 3 of its followers immediately broke off from the main assault to pursue the new targets, their movements swift and purposeful rather than the shambling gait that had characterized zombie pursuit patterns in the past. Emily's pistol clicked empty, and she threw the useless weapon at the nearest zombie while reaching for the knife she kept strapped to her leg. The blade was designed for utility rather than combat, but in close quarters, it represented their last hope of creating enough space to attempt an escape. Jake managed to free his bat from the zombie's ribcage with a wet tearing sound, immediately swinging it in a wide arc that forced several attackers to step back momentarily. The intelligent zombie watched this display with what appeared to be growing impatience, then stepped forward to take direct control of the situation. The creature was faster than Jake had anticipated, its crowbar meeting his bat with enough force to send vibrations up his arms and nearly knock the weapon from his grip. But more disturbing than its strength was its technique. The zombie fought with learned skill rather than mindless aggression, parrying Jake's attacks and looking for openings with the calculated patience of an experienced fighter. Emily tried to assist by attacking from the side, but the intelligent zombie seemed to anticipate her movement, backhanding her with enough force to send her sprawling across the pavement while never taking its attention off Jake. The sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the forest, indicating that Marcus had encountered the pursuing zombies and was attempting to defend the children. Each shot represented precious ammunition being expended, and Jake knew that their group's limited resources were being depleted in a battle they couldn't afford to fight. The intelligent zombie seemed to recognize this as well, its grotesque smile widening as it pressed its attack with renewed vigor, forcing Jake to give ground while its remaining followers closed off potential escape routes. Jake's strength was beginning to fail under the relentless assault, his swings becoming slower and less precise as exhaustion set in. The intelligent zombie capitalized on this weakness, landing a glancing blow with its crowbar that sent Jake stumbling backward into the side of an abandoned car. Emily struggled to her feet, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, but her determination remained unshaken as she prepared to continue fighting despite their increasingly desperate situation. The zombie leader raised its crowbar for what appeared to be a finishing blow, but suddenly paused as a new sound reached them from the highway, the distant rumble of multiple engines approaching at high speed. The creature's head snapped toward the noise, its tactical thinking apparently extending to recognizing potential threats from unexpected directions. Jake seized the momentary distraction to swing his bat with his remaining strength, connecting solidly with the zombie's shoulder and causing it to stagger backward while letting out a shriek of rage that sounded almost human in its fury. The approaching vehicles were becoming louder, and Jake could now distinguish the sound of motorcycles mixed with what might have been a truck or military vehicle. The intelligent zombie seemed to weigh its options with visible calculation, looking between the approaching reinforcements and its current prey while its followers waited for direction. The decision it reached would determine whether Jake and Emily lived to see another day, and whether the children hiding in the forest would survive long enough to discover what new hope or danger was racing toward them along the abandoned highway. A convoy of 3 military motorcycles roared onto the scene, followed by a massive armored truck that had clearly been retrofitted for zombie combat, its reinforced bumpers and metal grating over the windows speaking to months of hard-earned survival experience. The lead motorcycle rider wore full tactical gear and moved with the precision of someone who had made fighting the undead into a science rather than a desperate struggle. As the vehicles screeched to a halt, Jake could see that these weren't just random survivors, they were organized, well-equipped, and most importantly, they seemed to know exactly what they were dealing with when they saw the intelligent zombie coordinating its attack. The intelligent zombie let out a piercing shriek that was clearly a retreat signal, and its followers immediately began withdrawing from their assault on Jake and Emily, moving with the same coordinated precision they had shown during the attack. But the newcomers were ready for this tactic, dismounting from their vehicles with weapons already drawn and positioning themselves to cut off the zombies' escape routes. The lead rider removed his helmet to reveal a weathered face marked by a jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, his eyes holding the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had survived far too many encounters like this one. Lieutenant Colonel David Brennan, United States Army, the man called out as he advanced with his assault rifle trained on the intelligent zombie. "We've been tracking this particular specimen for 3 weeks now, and it's time to end this hunt." His statement confirmed Jake's worst fears about the scope of the zombie evolution. If the military was actively hunting specific intelligent zombies, then the problem was far more widespread and dangerous than their small group had realized. The implications suggested that organized zombie leadership might be emerging across multiple regions, coordinating attacks and potentially building some form of undead civilization. The intelligent zombie seemed to recognize the threat posed by these experienced fighters, abandoning its previous tactical confidence in favor of desperate self-preservation. It gestured frantically to its remaining followers, who began attacking with renewed ferocity despite the obvious futility of their situation. The military team responded with lethal efficiency, their weapons and tactics clearly designed specifically for zombie combat, with each shot precisely placed to ensure immediate incapacitation. Jake watched in amazement as soldiers who had clearly spent months perfecting their anti-zombie technique systematically dismantled what had seemed like an insurmountable threat just moments before. Emily struggled to her feet, using Jake's shoulder for support as they both tried to process the sudden reversal of their fortunes. The sounds of gunfire from the forest had stopped, which could mean either that Marcus had successfully eliminated the pursuing zombies or that something far worse had occurred. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan seemed to read their concern, nodding toward one of his soldiers who immediately began moving in the direction of the woods with practiced stealth. The coordination of the military team suggested that rescue operations like this were routine for them, raising questions about how many other survivor groups they had encountered and what larger mission they might be pursuing. The intelligent zombie made a final desperate attempt to escape, sprinting toward an abandoned building with speed that caught even the experienced soldiers off guard. Brennan's shot missed by inches, and the creature disappeared through a broken window while its remaining followers continued their futile but vicious assault on the military team. Jake realized that this zombie's escape represented a significant failure for the soldiers, whose grim expression suggested they understood the long-term implications of allowing such a specimen to survive and potentially report back to whatever hierarchy might exist among the evolved undead. "We need to pursue immediately," Brennan shouted to his team while reloading his weapon with practiced efficiency. "If that thing reaches the main horde, it'll report our position and capabilities, and we'll lose any tactical advantage we might have maintained." His words confirmed that the military had been conducting a careful campaign against organized zombie forces, suggesting that somewhere in the chain of command, strategists were treating this as a war rather than simply a survival situation. The existence of zombie hierarchies capable of military-style intelligence gathering and reporting represented a fundamental shift in the nature of the threat facing humanity. Jake found his voice despite his exhaustion and confusion, calling out to Brennan as the soldier prepared to pursue the escaped zombie. "There are children in those woods, our people went that way when the attack started." Brennan's expression softened slightly at the mention of children, and he spoke briefly into a radio headset before making what appeared to be a tactical decision that balanced immediate pursuit against humanitarian concerns. The fact that these soldiers still prioritized civilian protection despite their obvious military objectives suggested that some remnant of organized government or military command structure still existed. Two soldiers remained to escort Jake and Emily toward the forest while Brennan and the others began their pursuit of the intelligent zombie, their movements suggesting familiarity with both the terrain and their quarry's likely behavior patterns. As they walked, Jake noticed that the soldiers' equipment included specialized ammunition, modified weapons, and communication devices that seemed far more advanced than anything civilian survivors had managed to acquire. The investment in anti-zombie warfare technology implied that somewhere, significant resources were being dedicated to fighting back rather than simply surviving. The sound of voices calling out from the woods indicated that Marcus and the children were still alive, and Jake felt a wave of relief that nearly brought him to his knees. But as they approached the tree line, he could see that their ordeal was far from over, and that their encounter with organized zombie intelligence represented just the beginning of revelations that would fundamentally change everything they thought they knew about their chances of survival in this transformed world. Marcus emerged from the dense undergrowth carrying 8-year-old Katie in his arms, her small body trembling from a combination of fear and exhaustion, while Tommy clung tightly to his free hand with the desperate grip of a child who had witnessed far too much horror for his young age. The construction worker's face was grim, and Jake could see fresh scratches on his arms where he had pushed through thorny vegetation during their hasty retreat, but his eyes held relief at seeing his companions alive and unharmed. Behind him, Dr. Patricia Hayes moved with the careful steps of someone who had been forced to travel faster than her elderly body could comfortably manage, her silver hair disheveled and her usually pristine appearance showing the wear of their desperate flight through the forest. "3 of them followed us about halfway to the ravine," Marcus reported, his voice low but steady as he gently set Katie down while keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. "They moved like they knew exactly where we were going, not stumbling around like the others we've dealt with before. I managed to drop 2 with the rifle, but the third one just vanished into the trees when it heard your vehicles approaching." His account confirmed what Jake had begun to fear. that the intelligence they had witnessed wasn't limited to a single specimen, but represented a broader evolutionary development that was transforming zombie behavior patterns across the region. The two soldiers who had escorted them exchanged meaningful glances at Marcus's description, and Jake noticed one of them speaking quietly into his radio headset while the other maintained a careful watch on the surrounding forest. Dr. Hayes approached Emily with professional concern, immediately beginning to examine the cut on her head despite the chaotic circumstances, her veterinary training providing skills that translated well to human emergency medicine in their resource-scarce environment. The fact that she continued to function as their medical authority even in the midst of crisis spoke to the strength and adaptability that had allowed their small group to survive when so many others had perished. Tommy looked up at Jake with eyes that held far too much understanding for a child his age, his small voice barely above a whisper as he asked, "Are the smart ones going to find us everywhere we go now?" The question struck Jake like a physical blow, not just because of its implications for their survival, but because it demonstrated that even the children were beginning to grasp the fundamental shift in their reality that the emergence of intelligent zombies represented. The innocence that he and the others had fought so desperately to preserve was being eroded by truths that no child should have to confront. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's voice crackled through one of the soldiers' radios, reporting that the intelligent zombie had successfully evaded pursuit by using terrain features and movement patterns that suggested extensive familiarity with the local area. The specimen appears to have established territorial knowledge and possibly cached resources, Brennan's voice continued, his military terminology barely concealing the disturbing implications of his findings. "We're dealing with something that's been operating in this region long enough to develop strategic advantages that we haven't accounted for in our current tactical assessments." Dr. Hayes looked up from treating Emily's wound, her expression troubled as she processed the military radio chatter and its implications for their understanding of zombie evolution. "If they're developing territorial behavior and caching resources, then we're not just dealing with enhanced intelligence," she said, her voice carrying the weight of scientific analysis mixed with personal fear. "We're looking at something that's beginning to exhibit complex planning capabilities and possibly even rudimentary culture development, which suggests cognitive abilities that approach or exceed basic human reasoning in certain areas." The soldier monitoring communications held up a hand for silence, then spoke urgently into his headset before turning to address the group with obvious concern. "Command reports coordinated zombie activity across multiple sectors, with what appears to be simultaneous attacks on 3 different survivor settlements within a 50-mile radius. The timing suggests communication capabilities that extend far beyond what we've previously documented, and the tactical coordination indicates a level of strategic planning that represents a fundamental threat escalation." His words painted a picture of zombie evolution that extended far beyond isolated incidents, suggesting an organized campaign that posed existential threats to human survival. Jake felt the familiar weight of leadership responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized that their small group's encounter was part of a much larger and more dangerous development than they had imagined. The military presence suggested that organized resistance still existed, but the scope of the zombie evolution implied that humanity's position was far more precarious than any of them had understood. The children looked between the adults with growing anxiety, their young minds struggling to process conversations that dealt with threats beyond their comprehension but clearly within their experience. Marcus shifted his grip on his rifle, his construction worker's pragmatism cutting through the scientific and military analysis to focus on immediate practical concerns. "What does this mean for our plan to reach Colorado?" he asked, referring to the rumored safe zone that had motivated their group's journey for the past several weeks. "If these things are coordinating attacks across the region, then every route we might take could be compromised, and every settlement we might try to resupply at could be under threat or already overrun." Brennan's voice returned to the radio with information that would force them to confront the possibility that their entire understanding of the post-outbreak world had been dangerously incomplete. "All units be advised, satellite reconnaissance indicates large-scale zombie movements converging on multiple strategic locations, with patterns suggesting centralized command and control capabilities that we have not previously encountered. Immediate evacuation of all civilian populations from affected areas is now the top priority, as current defensive strategies may be inadequate against this level of organized opposition." The implications of Brennan's radio transmission hung heavy in the air as the group processed the reality that their personal struggle for survival had become part of a much larger conflict that threatened the very existence of human civilization. Dr. Hayes was the first to break the stunned silence, her scientific mind immediately grasping the scope of what coordinated zombie movements across multiple strategic locations would mean for any remaining government infrastructure or military installations. If they're targeting strategic locations specifically, then we're not dealing with evolved instincts or even basic intelligence, she said, her voice trembling slightly as the full implications became clear. We're dealing with something that understands human infrastructure, military strategy, and possibly even our communication networks well enough to plan systematic attacks designed to cripple organized resistance. The soldier monitoring communications continued receiving updates that painted an increasingly dire picture of coordinated assaults occurring simultaneously across a massive geographic area, with zombie forces demonstrating tactical knowledge that suggested they had been observing and learning from human defensive strategies for months. Command reports that the Denver safe zone has gone dark, and the Colorado Springs military installation is reporting coordinated attacks from multiple directions using what appears to be siege tactics, he relayed, his professional composure barely masking the fear in his voice. The news struck Marcus like a physical blow, as their entire journey and all the sacrifices they had made had been focused on reaching what they believed was a secure haven in Colorado. Tommy began crying quietly, his young mind finally overwhelmed by the adult conversations about threats and dangers that he couldn't fully understand but clearly recognized as meaning that nowhere was safe for them anymore. Katie wrapped her arms around her brother, her own fear manifesting as a fierce protectiveness that mirrored the adult dynamics playing out around them, while Emily knelt down to provide what comfort she could despite her own growing despair about their prospects for long-term survival. The sight of the children's distress served as a stark reminder that their decisions affected more than just their own lives, and that the responsibility of protecting innocence in an increasingly hostile world weighed heavily on every choice they made. Brennan's voice returned to the radio with new information that would fundamentally alter their understanding of the timeline they were working with for escape or rescue. All surviving units are ordered to implement Protocol 7 immediately. This is not a drill, repeat, this is not a drill. Large-scale zombie formations are moving toward major population centers with estimated arrival times of 6 to 12 hours, and all evacuation efforts must be completed within that window. The military protocol designation suggested that this scenario had been anticipated and planned for, but the urgency in Brennan's voice indicated that even the worst-case planning had not fully prepared them for the scale and coordination of the current threat. Dr. Hayes pulled Jake aside, her expression grave as she shared observations that she hadn't wanted to voice in front of the children but that Jake needed to understand for their survival planning. The evolution we're witnessing isn't random or gradual, she whispered, her veterinary experience with animal behavior providing insights that were proving terrifyingly relevant to their situation. The coordination, the strategic thinking, the apparent communication networks, this suggests either rapid acceleration of natural evolutionary processes or something that was deliberately engineered to create exactly this kind of organized threat to human survival. The soldier coordinating with command held up his hand for attention as new intelligence came through that would require immediate tactical decisions from their group. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan is reporting that the intelligent zombie that escaped from our engagement has been observed leading a formation of approximately 200 zombies toward this location, with estimated arrival in 3 hours. The formation is moving in tactical columns and appears to be following reconnaissance intelligence about our position and capabilities. The news meant that their brief respite with the military team had been an illusion, and that their encounter with the intelligent zombie had marked them as specific targets for what was essentially an organized military assault by undead forces. Marcus immediately began checking his rifle and inventory of ammunition, his construction background having taught him to focus on practical preparations even in the face of overwhelming odds, while Emily gathered the few medical supplies they had managed to salvage from their interrupted mission to the gas station. The children stayed close to Dr. Hayes, who had assumed the role of their primary caretaker during crisis situations, her calm demeanor providing them with emotional stability even as the adults around them struggled with the magnitude of the threats they were facing. Jake realized that their group's survival would depend not just on their ability to evade immediate threats, but on their capacity to adapt to a world where human beings were no longer the dominant intelligence on the planet. The military team's radio chatter indicated that evacuation procedures were being implemented across the entire region, with aircraft being deployed to extract both military personnel and civilian survivors from areas that could no longer be defended against coordinated zombie assaults. But the logistics of reaching extraction points while being actively hunted by intelligent zombie forces presented challenges that would test every survival skill they had developed over the past 3 months. The soldier in charge of their immediate area approached Jake with a map showing potential evacuation routes, each marked with notations about zombie activity levels and estimated travel times that painted a stark picture of their limited options. "We have one chance," the soldier said, his finger tracing a route that led through difficult terrain toward a landing zone approximately 15 miles to the northeast. "But it means moving fast, staying quiet, and hoping that the zombie formation tracking us doesn't have scouts positioned along the route we'll be taking." As Jake studied the map and considered their chances of covering 15 miles of dangerous territory with 2 young children while being pursued by organized zombie forces, he realized that their next few hours would determine whether their small group would survive to see whatever new phase of human resistance might emerge from the coordinated assault that was reshaping the very nature of the conflict between the living and the undead. The evacuation began with the methodical precision of people who understood that every minute counted, as Jake helped Dr. Hayes gather their few remaining supplies while Marcus lifted Tommy onto his shoulders and Emily secured Katie's small backpack with the essentials they would need for the 15-mile journey through hostile territory. The military team had provided them with basic emergency rations and additional ammunition, but the weight of carrying everything they needed for survival had to be balanced against their ability to move quickly and quietly through terrain that would likely be monitored by zombie scouts with intelligence capabilities that none of them fully understood. The soldier leading their evacuation, Sergeant Rodriguez, had warned them that the route would take them through areas where previous survivor groups had been ambushed, and that the zombies appeared to be learning from each encounter, adapting their tactics to counter human movement patterns and survival strategies. As they moved into the forest, Jake could hear the distant sound of the approaching zombie formation, a low rumbling that reminded him uncomfortably of military vehicles but was actually the coordinated movement of hundreds of undead creatures following the intelligent zombie's strategic direction toward their last known position. The children remained remarkably quiet despite their fear, Tommy clinging to Marcus's neck while Katie walked between Emily and Dr. Hayes with a determination that spoke to the resilience that had allowed them to survive this long in a world that had become fundamentally hostile to human life. Every few minutes, Sergeant Rodriguez would pause to check his GPS device and radio for updates from the extraction team, his expression growing more concerned as reports came in about additional zombie formations moving to intercept potential evacuation routes throughout the region. Dr. Hayes stumbled slightly on the uneven terrain, her age showing despite her determination to keep pace with the group, and Jake realized that their evacuation timeline was optimistic given the physical limitations they were working with and the distance they still needed to cover. Marcus immediately adjusted Tommy's position and moved to support Dr. Hayes without being asked, his protective instincts extending to every member of their makeshift family regardless of the additional burden it placed on his own physical capabilities. Emily took point behind Sergeant Rodriguez, her medical training having given her observational skills that proved valuable for spotting potential threats or obstacles before they became serious problems for the group's movement through the increasingly dense forest. The radio chatter from Sergeant Rodriguez's headset provided a constant stream of updates about zombie movements that painted an increasingly desperate picture of coordinated assaults occurring across multiple evacuation routes, with intelligent zombies apparently anticipating human escape strategies and positioning their forces to maximize casualties among fleeing survivors. Extraction Point Alpha has been compromised, came one particularly chilling report. Large zombie formation arrived 30 minutes ahead of predicted schedule, suggesting intelligence gathering capabilities that exceed our current assessment models. The news meant that their current destination might already be under threat, and that the military's evacuation procedures were proving inadequate against an enemy that could think, plan, and adapt faster than human strategic planning had anticipated. Jake found himself thinking about the broader implications of what they had witnessed as they pushed through thorny underbrush that seemed designed to slow their progress and announce their location to any pursuing forces. The evolution of zombie intelligence represented more than just a tactical challenge, it suggested that humanity's position as the dominant species on Earth was being challenged by something that retained human knowledge while discarding human limitations like fatigue, fear, and moral constraints. The organized nature of the zombie assaults indicated that somewhere in the undead hierarchy, strategic thinking was occurring at levels that rivaled or exceeded human military planning, with access to intelligence networks that allowed for coordination across vast geographic areas. Sergeant Rodriguez suddenly held up his hand, signaling for complete silence as he listened to something through his headset that caused his expression to shift from concern to alarm. "Extraction Point Bravo is reporting incoming zombie formations from multiple directions," he whispered, "and the helicopter is requesting immediate confirmation of survivor numbers and location for emergency pickup procedures." The urgency in his voice indicated that their window for evacuation was closing rapidly, and that the next few minutes would determine whether they would be rescued or left to face the coordinated zombie assault with only their limited weapons and supplies. The sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, growing stronger as they approached what Sergeant Rodriguez confirmed was their modified extraction point, but Jake could also hear other sounds that suggested they were not the only ones who had detected the aircraft's approach. Emily spotted movement through the trees that could have been other survivors or could have been zombie scouts, and the group found themselves caught between the hope of rescue and the fear that their salvation might also serve as a beacon for their enemies. Dr. Hayes gathered the children close to her, whispering reassurances that everything would be all right while her eyes reflected the same uncertainty that Jake felt about their chances of reaching safety before the coordinated zombie forces could complete whatever trap they were clearly attempting to spring. Marcus broke into a run despite carrying Tommy, his construction worker's strength allowing him to maintain speed even with the additional burden, while Jake and Emily flanked Dr. Hayes and Katie to provide protection during their final desperate push toward the extraction point. The helicopter's rotors grew louder, and through the trees ahead, Jake could see the aircraft hovering over a small clearing while soldiers on the ground secured the area for landing. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were growing closer, and Jake realized that their survival would depend on reaching that helicopter before the intelligent zombies' coordinated assault could prevent their escape, leaving them to face an evolved enemy that represented humanity's worst nightmare, an adversary that could think like humans while possessing all the relentless determination and physical resilience of the undead, forever changing the nature of the struggle for survival in a world where the rules of life and death had been rewritten by forces beyond human understanding.